going to cover here. Ben D'Angelo and Dan Walker will go over the workshop objectives and basically which is part of the efforts of the ASCE-NOAA Task Force. Dan?
I just want to go with the flow, whatever. All right, good morning, everybody. I'm a bit of a walker and talker, so I'm going to stand here. It's great to see everybody again. I just want to point out this room is full of a lot of motivated and intelligent and contributing people, and I want to thank everybody for their time, but I want to point out there's another 50 people online. So this is a hybrid meeting, and we got to kind of keep that in mind as we go through.
Jan, I apologize. Can you,
do I need to be here?
Can you grab the microphone off the stand, please?
Okay.
Just slide it out.
See if I can walk and chew gum. So you and I'll have to pass it back and forth. So,
Also works well.
oh, okay. All right. Anyway, thank you for being here. Sorry for that little technical glitch, Matt. I'll try to pay attention. So what we're going to try to do here is just to kind of walk you through. Who's? Yeah, but this isn't my talk. Where am I? Okay, there we go. Thank you. So I'm going to kind of try to walk you through this. We have two very different organizations that we're trying to bring together here. And so, you know, we've made a lot of progress. We're going to talk about that progress. But what I'm trying to do is to help you as the participants in this workshop understand what we're trying to accomplish in the next 2 days, because it's really kind of a bit of a critical juncture, in my opinion. As Bilal mentioned, you know, we've got several objectives here. We want to strengthen the relationship between NOAA, the federal family, really. And I appreciate Tom mentioning that, and Undersecretary Bavishi. I really appreciate the other federal agencies that are here, NIST, FEMA, NASA has been involved. So thank you all. We want to, what we really are trying to focus on is two things. We have to move toward being able to identify the priority civil engineering needs or requirements. That's really kind of an essential step. NOAA has a lot of activities that they're building around this engagement. So we need to make progress there. And then we want to talk about how do we sustain this process over time. You know, a lot of this work has been stimulated by the Inflation Reduction Act funds that have been provided. As Dr. Spinrad mentioned at the summit a year ago, having new money and having new resources to put into something like this really allows NOAA to move forward and to be more supportive. But, you know, that's a one-time injection of capital. How do we sustain this? So that's the day two kind of priority. Ben, you got any? All right, so many of you have seen this chart many times. This is from NOAA, from the National Center for Environmental Information. It's the number of billion-dollar disasters. Again, Undersecretary Bavishi mentioned this. While part of this is undoubtedly changes in climate, changes in the weather and climate factors that lead to disasters, it's also about what we build, where we build it, and kind of when we build it, how we build it. And so this is kind of the backdrop. I like to insert this in all of these because we may not, as civil engineers or geologists or climate scientists, be able to drive economic policy. We can play a role in determining how we build and where we build. And that's a big part of ASCE 73, the sustainability standard. You just poke me whenever you want to. I don't understand why I'm not. Where am I supposed to be aiming this? Oh, there we go. It's just a little slow. Okay. One of the mechanisms that we talked about early on in this process is, what do we use as a focusing mechanism? There's 150,000 or 160,000 now, I believe, ASCE members, trying to do expert elicitation and work with individual engineers to find out what they're doing and how they're doing it would be a very daunting approach. So we rapidly focused on ASCE code standards and manuals of practice, because they represent an articulation of how civil engineering practice is done, at least as an opening marker. All right. So ASCE brings this expertise to the table. We're trying to leverage that to be as efficient as possible in helping NOAA design services to support civil engineering. NOAA, of course, plays a major significant role in the collection, management, and dissemination of climate and weather information. That's in their DNA. That's part of their mission statement. If we can kind of shape this direction of this process to better serve the needs of civil engineers and architects, we can make substantial progress, we believe, in terms of having a more resilient infrastructure, more resilient society. So it's kind of a match made in heaven. It's just a question of, how do we get these two very different organizations to work together? And to do that, I think everybody has to kind of understand what that really means in practice. So as a mechanism to stimulate this, the task force developed this concept, and really the concept is, we're going to start with the standard, going to put civil engineering practice in the center, start with the standard, work our way through a process to come back to the standard. So Bilal coined this as the standard to standard approach. It could be practice to practice. We're going to get into some of the nuances here in just a second. But the idea is to start with the published standards, see what information is used in those standards, understand how engineers work with that information, understand where they currently get that data, then talk about, well, how do we project conditions into the future? If we only look backward and use observational data, we're introducing a sample bias because the climate is changing. That's the nature of the challenge of non-stationarity. So then we can talk about, well, if this is the observed value they use, what would be a comparable projected value, so that we can look at things out 30, 50, 100 years into the future. And then how do we translate that into an engineering value, a value that an engineer would actually use in design, for example. So it's this process that we've focused on, at least in the first year of the work we've been doing. We've had a lot of engagement. The beginning of the ASCE-NOAA partnership started with a cooperative agreement that put the University of Maryland in the center as kind of a boundary organization to try to promote the engagement of these two very different organizations. So in 2022, which is when that work really started, we participated in a series of workshops. We worked with the Sustainability Technical Committee. We worked in a variety of areas, doing listening sessions, trying to develop some momentum that eventually led to some workshops that we had in the last few months of 2022 to focus on kind of the near-term immediate needs of ASCE and what information that NOAA could produce in a very quick turnaround to kind of jumpstart and have that early win. As a part of that workshop, we developed a report. It's available online. If you haven't seen it, I would strongly recommend you take a look at it. It captured work in 4 areas: temperature and rainfall extremes, extreme winds, and coastal hazards, primarily coastal sea level rise. This table is just one element of that report. It's not even the complete table, but what I wanted to focus on here is, we chose these 4 areas because of all of the different hazards. These seem to have, based on a review of existing ASCE standards, seem to come up the most frequently, right? So we saw this as kind of a near-term win opportunity to focus on these, and primarily to see how would we transition information that NOAA may already have as rapidly as possible. So this was a very near-term activity. All right. Today's meeting and the focus of today is very different. We're looking at longer horizons now. How would we really want to do this if we have the 3 or 4 years that the MOU gives us to try to accomplish progress? The other aspect of this was we caught the ASCE-7, the building load standard, right at the right time. We caught that cycle right at the right time. So much of the discussion was framed by the process that the Structural Engineering Institute was going through to develop ASCE-7. So ASCE-7 really informed a lot of those early discussions. But obviously ASCE-7, as important a standard as it is only one window onto civil engineering need. So that's the other way that this workshop is changing. We're now expanding the aperture, so to speak, to try to capture a more complete picture. So then we go into 2023. There's 2 points here that are relevant. One is the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding between ASCE and NOAA. They're really codified what we're doing now. And then the other was ASCE Inspire, which was really the first major conference that I'm aware of that really focused on how does civil engineering practice use climate information to develop resilient infrastructure. So now we're rolling into 2024. Early this year, NOAA introduced or announced the industry proving ground activity. Russ Vos from NCEI will talk more about it later today. But the important thing is it focuses on 3 areas: retail, risk and reinsurance, and architecture and engineering. Of those 3 sectors, ASCE is the one entity that has a formal memorandum of understanding with NOAA to do exactly this process. So as a consequence, I think ASCE is seen by NOAA, I don't want to put words in NOAA's mouth, but as seen as a very critical first point of contact in terms of how are we going to support engineering and architecture in the United States. So what are we doing today? All right. So we're focusing on these technical issues. We have many different disciplines here represented. We have the structural engineering community. We have environment and water resources engineers. We have coast, ocean, ports, and river waterways engineers. And then we have geotechnical engineers represented by the Geo Institute. Those communities have very diverse views about engineering guidance and histories associated with engineering guidance. SEI, the structural engineers, have a lot of really relevant ASCE standards. EWRI has several too, probably not as reliant on standards maybe as some of the structural engineers. The coastal community, oceans, ports, COPRI, fewer standards, more maybe manuals of practice. And then the geotechnical engineers are really like, that community, because of the diversity of conditions that they deal with, doesn't really put a major focus on codes and standards or manuals of practice for that matter. So how do we try to develop a process that's going to address all of those different diverse communities? So if we have the kind of the general use case that follows that same process that I talked about earlier, but it's not just a standard, it's really about the application, right? And we go through that process, we can develop what's essentially a data point, right, represented by this blue ball that talks about it could be characterized in a number of different ways. The hazard, engineering guidance it's related to, engineering application, weather and climate variables, or refresh frequency. In other words, it's a specific case of where engineering practice needs climate information. If we collect all of these theoretical use cases and we try to filter them, right? So we've kind of got like, I'm a geologist, so I think of this as like kind of nested sieves. If we pour these use cases through this set of sieves, ASCE-7, which we talked about earlier, is going to capture a fair number of those. And then each other, if we look at other standards, we'll capture a few more. Then if we look at the manuals of practice, we'll capture a few more. And then we're going to get down into the general use case. If we are able to prioritize around some of these key standards and manuals of practice to identify climate data sets and climate data products, projections that meet the needs of the majority of the use cases, that's a good prioritization approach. However, if we go today and we go through these and we see that, well, actually there's a lot of use cases that don't fit well into the needs of the standards, then we're going to have to explore other mechanisms. So that's what we're really trying to do. We need to understand in detail how climate and weather data is used for different engineering purposes. Okay, so the more detailed you are today in the breakouts, the more helpful it's going to be. So you're going to see this table a lot. I think of it as like the shopping list, right? There's a hazard column. There's a key design variable. How does the engineer really use this data? There's the potential relevant ASCE standard and code. And then there's columns for additional detail about the climate variable, not the engineering value, but the climate variables or variables that are used to calculate that value. All right. So the more complete we can fill out columns A, B, and maybe C, the better off we are, because at least we know what we're trying to accomplish. All right. So it's important to try to understand this table. You're going to spend a lot of time on it in the breakouts. We're trying to be as comprehensive as possible, but the emphasis here is what is that design variable and what climate and weather data do you need to calculate it? Now, day two. Let's say that we go through today, we're successful, we're able to identify these needs or requirements as I like to think of them, but tomorrow we're going to talk about, well, how's this process really going to work? And so this is where Ben and I have talked about this a lot. There's a lot going on in the landscape. When we talk about using model projections and we have conversations about greenhouse gas emission scenarios, those scenarios that drive that climate modeling effort are actually established through IPCC. And earlier this year, they were beginning to have conversations about how SSPs and RCPs, what's going to be the next approach? How are they going to do it in the next cycle? So we have very little control over how these scenarios are developed. All right. The scenarios then are used to do the global climate model runs. As you may know, there's 35 to 45 major modeling centers that use those scenarios to do different kinds of climate modeling. That information is then fed into some IPCC working groups. Then we can get into activities where we take some of those global models and we downscale them. And that's what drives a lot of the information in the National Climate Assessment. NCEI, the National Center for Environmental Information, and NOAA play a major role in shaping the process to support the National Climate Assessment. And then here, we've got to find a mechanism to take this information and convert it into engineering values. So we may be a significant part of this process, but we have to understand that we can't control all of it, right? So what we can do is work more at this end. And the more we understand what the engineer value is, what you need to do engineering design or decision-making, the more NOAA can begin to influence how some of these products are developed. All right, so then the next part of it, there we go, is we want to have a predictable operational process. If ASCE is going to build standards that point to products like Atlas 15, we have to know that Atlas 15 and updates are going to be made available down the road. So as I mentioned, a lot of the work that we're doing today was funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. That's a one-time appropriation. We have to work together to make sure that NOAA continues and the other federal agencies that we rely on continue to get the information or the resources they need to support these activities. So understanding how frequently we're going to need updates, understanding how we want those updates delivered, understanding, where are we going to park all this data, who's going to control access, how do we make this process work? We want to explore that tomorrow so that we can begin to align some of the discussions and some of the advice we're giving to NOAA and the other federal agencies. So today is all about the need, tomorrow is about the process. And with that, Ben? Yeah, please.
Thank you, Dan. For folks who don't know me, I'm Ben D'Angelo with NOAA. I'm serving as the acting director of the Climate Program Office in the research arm. Dan, thank you. I think Dan covered the bases really, really well. So I don't have too much to add. I'll just make a few points. One, I'm not just saying this because I'm in this room, but this is really one of my favorite projects that I work on in NOAA because the mission is very clear. It's very practical, and it just has the potential to make an enormous impact for years to come. Second, you've seen from Janie Bavishi's presentation that there is widespread support for this partnership in NOAA at the senior levels, and I think over time we've done a good job of getting more people across the organization involved in this effort because we need people in the research office and the weather service and NESDIS, ocean service, et cetera. So I think we've done a good job of that and have also expanded the partnership to other federal agencies. Really just the last point is what Dan ended on there. This whole effort is very, very much in line with what NOAA is working to do in a broader sense. And that is for NOAA to be better positioned, be better organized to enhance the development and delivery of climate services. And that means providing information that is targeted, tailored, fit for purpose, speaking to those climate sensitive decision points in different sectors and different regions. And this partnership is often mentioned as part of the elevator speech that the head of NOAA gives and what NOAA is doing on the climate front for climate services. So this workshop, we have the opportunity to think big picture and long term. We've done a lot of good work focusing on the more immediate needs of ASCE-7. And I think by forcing us through that, I think we've already learned quite a bit about how these two communities can come together. But now at this workshop, we want to be thinking not just ASCE-7, we really want to be thinking about beyond. And I really like the words that were on that one slide of thinking about how this interaction can become more predictable, more operational over time. We have many products coming out of NOAA, some in different parts of NOAA, Atlas 15 and the National Climate Assessment. Internally within NOAA, we need to be thinking about making sure all those climate products are consistent, using consistent assumptions. And at the same time, we need to be thinking about how to essentially better sync up our schedules. ASCE, you have your own world of the standard setting process. And in our NOAA world, we have our own schedule of, for example, when the National Climate Assessment comes out, when the next Atlas product comes out. So we need to be thinking about, things are not going to be synced up perfectly. We all know the world is too messy for that, but we need to be thinking about how to kind of sync up these schedules as much as possible to facilitate that mainstreaming of best available climate science into into civil engineering standards and practice.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions? I know we're running late, but
Do we have any questions? I want to make sure that the goals of the workshop are clear to everybody. And the key item is that. So while you are trying to formulate the question of like both sides of it, just make sure that at the very end, my goal is like, ASC members to be reporting research.
Bilal wanted to do a seating chart to make sure that every other person was, but no, I'm kidding. All right, excellent.
Dan,
Or any online? Any online?
Dan, you've done an outstanding job. No questions.